Staff Sergeant Maria Santos never imagined her childhood spent hunting deer with her grandfather in the mountains of Colorado would save the lives of 12 Army Rangers in Afghanistan. At 26, she had been assigned to logistics for 3 years, managing supply chains and coordinating equipment deliveries across Forward Operating Base Chapman. Her days were filled with spreadsheets, inventory reports, and the endless task of ensuring that ammunition, food, and medical supplies reached the right places at the right times. Maria had enlisted straight out of high school, driven by a desire to serve her country and escape the limited opportunities in her small hometown of Durango. Her ASFOB scores were exceptional, particularly in mathematics and spatial reasoning, which landed her in the 92A Automated Logistical Specialist program. While some soldiers complained about being stuck behind a desk, Maria found satisfaction in the precise nature of logistics. Every calculation mattered. Every decimal point could mean the difference between a successful mission and a disaster. The irony wasn't lost on her that despite being one of the best marksmen to ever graduate from her basic training cycle, she had never been assigned to a combat role. Her drill sergeants had noticed her natural ability immediately. During qualification week, while other recruits struggled to hit targets at 200 meters, Maria was consistently placing shots within a 2-inch grouping at 400 meters using iron sights. Her breathing control was textbook perfect, her trigger squeeze smooth and controlled, and her ability to calculate wind drift and bullet drop was almost supernatural. But the Army had other plans for her. With her high intelligence scores and organizational skills, they needed her managing the complex web of supplies that kept combat operations running smoothly. Maria accepted her assignment without complaint, though she continued to practice at the range whenever her duties permitted. She told herself that her marksmanship was just a hobby now, a way to stay connected to the memories of those hunting trips with her grandfather. Forward Operating Base Chapman was a bustling hub of activity located in Khas Province, Afghanistan. The base served as a logistics center for dozens of smaller outposts scattered throughout the mountainous region. Maria's office was located in a reinforced concrete building near the center of the base, surrounded by tall concrete barriers and razor wire. Her days began at 0500 hours with intelligence briefings about convoy routes and security threats, followed by 16-hour shifts coordinating supply movements across some of the most dangerous terrain in Afghanistan. The work was demanding, but Maria thrived under pressure. She had developed a reputation for solving impossible logistics problems. When a remote outpost needed emergency medical supplies, but all helicopter flights were grounded due to weather, Maria found a way to get the supplies there using a combination of ground convoy and local contracted drivers who knew mountain passes that didn't appear on military maps. When a convoy was delayed by an IED attack and a forward operating base was running low on ammunition, Maria rerouted 3 different supply chains to ensure they received what they needed within 6 hours. Her colleagues respected her competence and attention to detail. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, the base logistics commander, often said that Maria could coordinate a supply drop to the moon if someone gave her the right coordinates. She had never lost a single piece of equipment under her watch, and her convoy routes had a 99.7% success rate, the highest in the region. But Maria sometimes felt like she was watching the war through a window. While her work was crucial, she rarely left the safety of the base. Her closest contact with combat came through radio reports from convoy escorts and the occasional mortar attack that sent everyone scrambling to bunkers. She wondered if she was really making a difference, or if she was just moving pieces around on a board while other people fought the real battles. The Rangers from 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment had arrived at Chapman 3 weeks earlier. They were conducting reconnaissance missions in the remote valleys north of the base, gathering intelligence on Taliban supply routes and weapons caches. Maria had been assigned to coordinate their resupply operations, which meant she interacted with them regularly when they returned from patrol. The Rangers were different from the regular Army units Maria was used to working with. They moved with a quiet confidence that came from extensive training and combat experience. Their equipment was always immaculate, their planning meticulous, and their professionalism evident in every interaction. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, their team leader, had developed a good working relationship with Maria. He appreciated that she understood the urgency of their missions and never delayed their requests with unnecessary paperwork. "You're wasted in logistics," Rodriguez had told her one evening as she helped load supplies for their next patrol. "With your attention to detail and ability to think under pressure, you'd make a hell of a combat soldier." Maria had smiled and shrugged off the comment, but it stayed with her. She had always wondered what it would be like to put her training to use in real combat situations. Her grandfather had taught her that shooting was about more than just hitting targets. It was about patience, discipline, and the ability to make critical decisions when everything was on the line. The Rangers' current mission was particularly challenging. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value Taliban commander was operating from a compound in the Spingar Mountains, approximately 40 kilometers north of the base. The terrain was extremely difficult with narrow mountain trails and limited visibility due to heavy forest cover. The Rangers would need to move on foot for the final 15 kilometers, carrying all their equipment and supplies for a 3-day operation. Maria had spent 2 days planning their resupply package. Every piece of equipment had to be carefully selected for weight and necessity. Ammunition, water, medical supplies, communications equipment, and emergency food rations were all precisely calculated based on the mission duration and expected conditions. She had even consulted weather reports and adjusted their water requirements based on predicted temperatures and humidity levels. The night before their departure, Maria was completing final inventory checks when she noticed a discrepancy in the ammunition count. According to her calculations, the Rangers were carrying 800 rounds less than their standard combat load. She double-checked her numbers and confirmed the shortage. It was 2,300 hours, and the Rangers were scheduled to depart at 0400. Maria could have submitted a report and recommended postponing the mission until the ammunition shortage was resolved. It would have been the safe, procedural approach. Instead, she spent the next 3 hours personally tracking down the missing ammunition from 3 different supply points across the base. By 0200 hours, she had located every missing round and personally inspected each magazine to ensure proper loading. When the Rangers arrived at the staging area for their pre-mission briefing, everything was perfect. Rodriguez noticed immediately that someone had gone above and beyond to ensure their success. "Outstanding work, Sergeant Santos," he said quietly. "Details like this save lives." Maria watched from the communications center as the Rangers loaded into helicopters for the first leg of their journey. She would maintain radio contact with them throughout the mission, coordinating any emergency resupply drops and serving as their primary link back to base command. As the helicopters disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, Maria settled in for 3 days of monitoring their progress from her desk. She had no way of knowing that within 36 hours, her grandfather's hunting lessons and her own natural marksmanship ability would be put to the ultimate test. The quiet professionalism that had made her exceptional at logistics was about to save the lives of 12 Rangers trapped in an ambush that would test every skill she had learned in 8 years of military service. The mission was supposed to be routine reconnaissance. Maria's careful planning and attention to detail had given the Rangers everything they needed for success. But in Afghanistan, even the best plans could change in an instant, and sometimes survival came down to skills that couldn't be learned from manuals or training programs. As Maria monitored their initial progress reports over the radio, she had no idea that she would soon discover just how much difference one person could make when everything was on the line. #assigned to logistics, not combat, until the Rangers were ambushed and she dropped 11 exact shots. The first day of the Ranger mission proceeded exactly according to plan. Maria monitored their progress from the communications center at Forward Operating Base Chapman, tracking their movement through predetermined checkpoints as they made their way toward the target compound. Every 4 hours, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez would transmit a brief status update using encrypted radio communication. Their progress was steady, the weather was cooperating, and all equipment was functioning properly. By the end of the first day, the Rangers had covered 32 kilometers and were positioned at their planned overnight observation post, approximately 8 kilometers from the target compound. Rodriguez's evening report was characteristically brief and professional. The team had encountered no enemy activity, their equipment was performing well, and they were prepared to begin final reconnaissance at first light. Maria felt a quiet satisfaction as she updated the mission status board. Her careful planning was paying off exactly as intended. The Rangers had everything they needed, their timeline was on schedule, and the operation was proceeding smoothly. She completed her evening reports and prepared to turn over monitoring duties to the night shift communications specialist. But something about the situation bothered her, though she couldn't immediately identify what was wrong. Maria had developed an intuition about logistics operations over 3 years of coordinating missions across Afghanistan. Small details that seemed insignificant often indicated larger problems developing. She decided to review the mission files one more time before leaving for the night. The intelligence reports showed that the target area had been relatively quiet for the past 2 weeks. No significant enemy movement had been detected, and local civilians had reported normal activity patterns around the target compound. This information had been crucial in planning the Rangers' approach route and timing. However, as Maria read through the reports more carefully, she noticed that the lack of enemy activity was actually unusual for this particular area. The Spingar Mountains were a known Taliban stronghold, with regular insurgent movement along established smuggling routes. The absence of recent activity could indicate either successful operations by coalition forces, or it could mean that insurgent groups were deliberately keeping a low profile while preparing for something significant. Maria made a note to discuss her concerns with Lieutenant Colonel Morrison in the morning. The second day began with encouraging news. Rodriguez's morning report indicated that they had successfully established surveillance on the target compound and were gathering valuable intelligence. Thermal imaging had identified at least 6 individuals moving around the compound, and their behavior patterns suggested the presence of someone important. Electronic intelligence gathering had detected multiple communication devices operating from the location, confirming that this was likely a significant command node. Throughout the day, Maria received regular updates as the Rangers documented enemy personnel, weapons positions, and communication patterns. Their mission was purely reconnaissance, so they remained hidden in their observation position while collecting information that would be used to plan a future direct action mission. Everything was proceeding perfectly, but Maria's uneasiness continued to grow. She had pulled additional intelligence reports about recent enemy activity throughout the province, and a pattern was beginning to emerge that troubled her. Several remote outposts had reported unusual movement of local civilians away from villages near known Taliban operating areas. Market activity in regional towns had decreased significantly over the past week. These could be coincidental events, but Maria's experience had taught her that seemingly unrelated changes often indicated something important was about to happen. During her lunch break, Maria walked to the intelligence section to discuss her concerns with Captain Williams, the base intelligence officer. Williams was initially skeptical about logistical personnel providing tactical analysis, but Maria's reputation for careful attention to detail earned her a hearing. After reviewing the information Maria had compiled, Williams agreed that the pattern was worth investigating further. "Your logistics perspective is actually valuable here," Williams admitted. "You're looking at supply patterns and civilian movement in ways that pure intelligence analysis might miss. I'm going to pass your observations up to regional command and recommend increased surveillance for the next 48 hours. Maria returned to the communications center feeling somewhat relieved that her concerns were being taken seriously. However, she also realized that if her suspicions were correct, the Rangers might be walking into a situation that was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. She made a mental note to pay extra attention to their communications and to be prepared to coordinate emergency support if needed. The afternoon passed quietly, with the Rangers continuing their surveillance mission. Their reports indicated steady intelligence collection and no immediate threats to their position. Maria began to think that perhaps her concerns had been overblown. Military operations always involved uncertainty, and sometimes patterns that seemed significant were actually just random events. As evening approached, Rodriguez transmitted what was scheduled to be their final report of the day. The Rangers had completed their primary reconnaissance objectives and were preparing to move to their extraction point the following morning. The mission had been a complete success, providing detailed intelligence about enemy positions and communication networks that would be invaluable for future operations. Maria was updating the mission status when she received an urgent message from the base communications center. Long-range radio monitoring had detected significant increases in enemy communication traffic throughout the region over the past 6 hours. Multiple Taliban units were coordinating movements using code words and timing that suggested a planned operation was beginning. The realization hit Maria like a physical blow. Her earlier suspicions had been correct. The Taliban had been deliberately maintaining a low profile while positioning forces for a coordinated attack. The Rangers' reconnaissance mission had proceeded smoothly because the enemy had been waiting for them to complete their intelligence gathering and begin moving toward extraction. The ambush would come when the Rangers were most vulnerable, loaded with equipment, and following predictable routes back to their pickup point. Maria immediately contacted Captain Williams in the intelligence section. Working together, they quickly analyzed the intercepted communications and confirmed that multiple enemy units were moving toward positions along the Rangers' planned extraction route. The Taliban had apparently been aware of the reconnaissance mission from the beginning and had used it as an opportunity to trap a high-value target. "We need to warn them immediately," Williams said. "But if we break radio silence now, we'll confirm to the enemy that we know about their plan. They might accelerate their timeline and attack before the Rangers can reach defensible positions." Maria studied the mission maps and timing charts she had prepared during the planning phase. The Rangers were currently 8 kilometers from their extraction point, following a route through mountainous terrain that would take them through 3 separate valleys connected by narrow ridge lines. The Taliban forces were positioning themselves to control the high ground overlooking these valleys, creating multiple kill zones that would be almost impossible to escape. "What if we don't warn them directly about the ambush?" Maria suggested. "What if we order an immediate emergency extraction from their current position? We could say that weather conditions are deteriorating and that the helicopter pickup needs to happen tonight instead of tomorrow morning." Williams considered the option. That could work, but it would require landing helicopters in unsecured territory at night. The risk to the flight crews would be enormous, and we still don't know exactly where all the enemy forces are positioned. If they have man-portable air defense systems, we could lose aircraft and crew members. Maria felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Her job was supposed to be coordinating supplies and equipment, not making life-or-death tactical decisions. But her careful analysis had identified a threat that could save the Rangers' lives, and now she needed to find a way to act on that information. "There's another option," she said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. "What if we can't get helicopters to their current position, but we can get them to a different location that's more defensible? I know this area from coordinating dozens of supply runs. There's a small plateau about 3 kilometers north of their current position that could handle helicopter landings and has good defensive positions." Williams pulled up topographical maps on his computer and studied the location Maria had identified. The plateau was elevated enough to provide good visibility of surrounding approaches, but it was also exposed enough that reaching it would require the Rangers to move through potentially dangerous terrain. If we're right about the ambush, moving to that location might force them to travel through some of the areas where enemy forces are positioning, Williams pointed out. "We could be sending them directly into danger." Maria studied the maps and timing estimates. The Taliban communication intercepts suggested that enemy forces were still moving into position and wouldn't be fully deployed until sometime after midnight. If the Rangers moved immediately and traveled quickly, They might be able to reach the defensive position before the ambush forces were ready. We need to make a decision now, Maria said. Every minute we wait gives the enemy more time to get into position. If we're going to move them, it has to be tonight. Williams reached for his secure telephone to contact the base commander. I'm going to recommend immediate emergency extraction. Your analysis is solid, and the risk of leaving them in their current position is too high. We'll order them to move to the plateau you identified and have helicopters standing by for pickup. As Williams made the call, Maria felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She had potentially saved the Rangers from walking into a deadly trap, but the emergency extraction would still put them at significant risk. Moving through mountainous terrain at night, while carrying full equipment loads, was dangerous under the best circumstances. If enemy forces were already in the area, the Rangers could find themselves in a running firefight with limited options for escape or reinforcement. The decision was made within minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison approved the emergency extraction based on the intelligence analysis Maria and Williams had provided. Rodriguez received orders to immediately move his team to the extraction point Maria had identified, with helicopters scheduled to pick them up before dawn. Maria returned to the communications center to monitor the Rangers' movement. As she settled in for what would clearly be a long night, she had no idea that her careful analysis had only delayed the inevitable confrontation. The Taliban forces were more numerous and better positioned than anyone had realized, and the Rangers were about to find themselves in the fight of their lives. The emergency extraction was about to become something much more complicated and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Hashtag assigned to logistics, not combat, until the Rangers were ambushed, and she dropped 11 exact shots. The Rangers began their emergency movement toward the extraction point at 2,147 hours. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez acknowledged the new orders without question, though Maria could hear the tension in his voice during their brief radio communication. Moving through unfamiliar mountainous terrain at night, while carrying full equipment loads, was exactly the kind of situation that tactical units trained extensively to handle, but it was never routine. Maria established herself as the primary communications link between the Rangers and Base Command. Her role was to monitor their progress, coordinate any emergency support they might need, and maintain constant awareness of their situation until the helicopters could safely extract them. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had authorized her to make immediate tactical decisions regarding logistics support without waiting for approval from higher command. The first hour of movement went smoothly. The Rangers made good progress across terrain that Maria had studied extensively during her mission planning. She tracked their movement using GPS coordinates transmitted every 15 minutes, and their pace was exactly on schedule to reach the extraction point well before the scheduled helicopter pickup. But Maria's earlier analysis proved to be incomplete. The Taliban forces weren't just positioning themselves along the Rangers' original extraction route. Intelligence intercepts over the past 2 hours revealed that enemy units were conducting a much larger operation, with forces moving throughout the entire region. Multiple groups were coordinating their movements to control key terrain features across a 20-kilometer area. Captain Williams rushed into the communications center at 2,300 hours with updated intelligence that changed everything. "We've identified at least 4 separate enemy groups moving tonight," he reported. "They're not just planning to ambush the Rangers. This appears to be preparation for a coordinated attack on multiple coalition positions, including our base." Maria felt her stomach drop as she studied the new intelligence reports. The Rangers were unknowingly moving through an area that was becoming saturated with enemy forces. Even worse, the plateau she had identified as a safe extraction point was now potentially compromised. If Taliban forces were planning attacks throughout the region, they would likely position units to control high ground like the plateau. "We need to warn Rodriguez immediately," Maria said. "If they continue toward the extraction point, they're going to walk into something much bigger than we originally thought." Williams was already reaching for the secure radio. But before he could establish contact, Maria's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the Rangers. Rodriguez's voice was tight with controlled tension as he reported enemy movement in their immediate area. "Base, this is Ranger 6. We have visual contact with armed individuals approximately 800 meters to our southeast. Count appears to be 6 to 8 personnel with automatic weapons. They appear to be moving toward our planned route. We are holding position and requesting guidance." Maria quickly plotted the Rangers' current location and the enemy position Rodriguez had reported. The Taliban unit was positioned almost exactly where her logistics planning had predicted they would encounter the most difficult terrain during their movement. It wasn't a coincidence. The enemy forces had studied the same terrain features and were using their knowledge to control key choke points. "Rodriguez, this is base," Williams responded. "Intelligence indicates multiple enemy units are operating throughout your area. We're seeing coordinated movement that suggests a much larger operation than initially anticipated. Can you identify alternate routes to the extraction point?" There was a long pause before Rodriguez replied. "Base, terrain options are limited. We have steep slopes to the north and west, and the valley floor to the east would leave us completely exposed. The route we planned appears to be the only feasible option for movement with our current equipment load." Maria studied the topographical maps and GPS data from the Rangers' position. Rodriguez was correct about the terrain limitations, but there might be alternatives that weren't immediately obvious from their current location. Her extensive knowledge of the area from coordinating supply runs gave her a different perspective on possible movement options. "Rodriguez, this is Santos in logistics," Maria transmitted. "I've coordinated multiple supply drops in your area. There's a goat trail approximately 400 meters north of your current position that parallels your planned route, but uses different terrain features. It's more difficult to travel, but it might avoid the areas where enemy forces are positioning." Rodriguez's response was immediate. "Santos, can you provide detailed navigation guidance for that route? We don't have detailed maps of unofficial trails, and movement in darkness without clear navigation would be extremely dangerous." Maria realized that she was about to exceed her authority and training in ways that could have serious consequences. Providing detailed tactical guidance to Rangers in enemy territory was far beyond her logistics responsibilities. But her knowledge of the terrain could potentially save their lives, and traditional command channels weren't moving fast enough to address the rapidly developing situation. "Rodriguez, I can provide turn-by-turn navigation guidance based on GPS coordinates and terrain features. But you need to understand that this information comes from logistics planning, not tactical reconnaissance. I can tell you where the trail goes, but I can't tell you what kind of opposition you might encounter along the way." Lieutenant Colonel Morrison entered the communications center just as Maria was making this offer. He had been monitoring the situation from the command center and understood the implications of what was developing. After a brief consultation with Captain Williams about the intelligence updates, Morrison made a command decision. "Santos, you have authorization to provide detailed navigation guidance to Ranger 6. Morrison said, "Your knowledge of the terrain may be their best option for reaching the extraction points safely. Williams will coordinate with regional command about potential changes to helicopter support based on the evolving threat situation." For the next 2 hours, Maria guided the Rangers through terrain that she knew only from supply coordination maps and aerial photography. She provided detailed GPS coordinates for each turn and terrain feature, warned them about steep sections that might slow their movement, and identified potential defensive positions where they could take cover if they encountered enemy forces. The goat trail was more difficult to navigate than their original route, but it offered better concealment and avoided the areas where intelligence indicated enemy forces were most likely to be positioned. The Rangers made steady progress, though their pace was slower due to the challenging terrain and the need for extra caution during night movement. At 0130 hours, Rodriguez reported that they had successfully avoided the enemy unit they had initially observed and were approximately halfway to the extraction point. Maria began to hope that her alternate route would allow them to complete their movement without serious incident. The helicopters were scheduled to arrive at the extraction point in 3 hours, and the Rangers appeared to be on track to reach the location with time to establish defensive positions. But the situation was about to change dramatically. At 0147 hours, Rodriguez transmitted an urgent report that would test every skill Maria had developed during her military career. Base, this is Ranger 6. We are taking effective enemy fire from multiple positions. We have encountered a well-prepared ambush with at least 12 enemy personnel using automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. We are pinned down in a small depression approximately 2 kilometers from the extraction point. We need immediate support. Maria felt her training and instincts take over as she responded to the emergency. Rodriguez, what is your exact position and current status? Are there any casualties? And what is your immediate defensive situation? Rodriguez's voice remained calm despite the obvious stress of his situation. Santos, we are in a small ravine with limited cover. No casualties at this time, but we are effectively pinned down by accurate fire from elevated positions. Enemy forces appear to have night vision capability and are using coordinated fire and movement tactics. We need extraction or reinforcement immediately. Maria quickly analyzed the Rangers' position using GPS coordinates and topographical data. They were trapped in terrain that offered minimal defensive advantages, facing enemy forces that clearly had superior positioning and possibly superior numbers. Traditional helicopter extraction would be extremely dangerous, and ground reinforcement would take hours to organize and execute. As Maria studied the tactical situation, she realized that there might be one option that no one else had considered. Her logistics expertise had given her detailed knowledge of supply routes and terrain features throughout the region. More importantly, her marksmanship skills and understanding of ballistics might provide a solution that could help the Rangers escape their current predicament. The decision she was about to make would change everything about her military career and her understanding of her own capabilities under pressure. #assigned to logistics, not combat, until the Rangers were ambushed, and she dropped 11 exact shots. Maria stared at the tactical display showing the Rangers' position, her mind racing through options that seemed increasingly desperate. Traditional rescue scenarios required helicopter support or ground reinforcement, both of which would take too long to organize. The Rangers were pinned down by superior enemy forces in terrain that offered them little defensive advantage. Every minute of delay increased the likelihood of casualties. "Morrison, I have an unconventional option," Maria announced, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised even her. "I know this area better than anyone on the base. I've coordinated dozens of supply runs through those exact terrain features. There's a ridge line approximately 1,200 meters southeast of the Rangers' position that would provide excellent overwatch and potential fire support." Lieutenant Colonel Morrison looked up from the communications console, where he had been coordinating with regional command about helicopter support options. "Santos, what exactly are you suggesting? We don't have sniper assets immediately available, and positioning conventional infantry on that ridge would take hours." Maria took a deep breath, understanding that her next words would either save the Rangers' lives or end her military career. "Sir, I can provide precision fire support from that position. I know the terrain. I can navigate there quickly using supply routes that avoid enemy positions, and I have the marksmanship skills necessary to engage targets at that distance." The communications center fell silent, except for the crackling radio transmissions from Rodriguez reporting continued enemy contact. Morrison, Williams, and the other personnel present stared at Maria as if she had suggested something impossible. A logistics specialist volunteering for solo sniper operations was so far outside normal procedures that no one immediately knew how to respond. "Santos, you're talking about a 1,200-meter shot in darkness against moving targets while under enemy fire," Morrison said slowly. "Even trained snipers would consider that an extremely challenging engagement. You're a logistics specialist, not a designated marksman." Maria understood Morrison's skepticism, but she also knew something that wasn't reflected in her official military records. During her 3 years at Forward Operating Base Chapman, she had spent hundreds of hours practicing long-range marksmanship on the base's extended rifle range. She had consistently demonstrated the ability to engage targets accurately at distances up to 1,500 meters using standard M4 rifles with magnified optics. More importantly, her grandfather's hunting lessons had taught her skills that military marksmanship training often overlooked: calculating wind drift across mountain valleys, compensating for temperature and humidity variations, and maintaining steady shooting positions on uneven terrain were all abilities she had developed during childhood hunting trips in Colorado's mountains. "Sir, I can make these shots," Maria said with quiet certainty. "I need transportation to the ridge position, a precision rifle with appropriate optics, and radio communication with the Rangers to coordinate fire support. I can be in position within 30 minutes and begin providing effective fire support immediately." Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio with increasing urgency. "Base, enemy forces are maneuvering to flank our position. We estimate 12 to 15 enemy personnel with automatic weapons. We need immediate support, or we're going to be overrun within the next 30 minutes." Morrison made a command decision that reflected both his desperation and his trust in Maria's demonstrated competence. "Santos, I'm authorizing your plan. Sergeant Martinez will provide transportation and assist with equipment. You'll have access to our best precision rifle and unlimited ammunition. But understand that this is completely outside standard procedures. If this goes wrong, I'll be held responsible for sending untrained personnel into combat." Maria was already moving toward the armory before Morrison finished speaking. She had identified the equipment she would need: an M24 sniper weapon system with a Leupold scope, match-grade ammunition, and night vision equipment that would allow her to identify targets in darkness. Her years of logistics experience had made her familiar with every piece of equipment on the base, including specialized weapons that were rarely used. Sergeant Martinez met her at the motor pool with a modified Humvee equipped for rapid movement across rough terrain. As they loaded the precision rifle and ammunition, Martinez expressed the doubts that everyone was feeling. "Santos, I've seen your scores on the rifle range, but this is different. You're talking about combat shooting under stress against people who are shooting back." Maria checked the rifle's optics and loaded her first magazine with carefully selected ammunition. "Martinez, I've been preparing for this my entire life. My grandfather taught me that shooting isn't about targets or scores. It's about being able to perform when everything depends on it. Today, 12 Rangers depend on it." The drive to the ridge position took 18 minutes across terrain that Maria had mapped during dozens of logistics operations. She used the travel time to study topographical maps and calculate environmental factors that would affect her shooting: wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure all influenced bullet trajectory at long distances. As they approached the ridge, Maria could hear the distant sound of automatic weapons fire from the valley below. The Rangers were still engaged in active combat, and their ammunition supplies would be limited to what they had carried during their reconnaissance mission. Time was running out for any rescue operation to be effective. Martinez positioned the Humvee behind the ridge line to provide concealment while Maria moved forward to establish her shooting position. She carried the precision rifle, ammunition, radio equipment, and night vision gear to a carefully selected location that provided clear sight lines to the area where the Rangers were pinned down. Through her rifle scope and night vision equipment, Maria could see muzzle flashes from multiple enemy positions surrounding the small depression where the Rangers had taken cover. The Taliban forces had established an effective ambush with overlapping fields of fire that prevented the Rangers from moving to more defensible positions. Maria established radio contact with Rodriguez to coordinate her fire support. "Ranger 6, this is Overwatch. I am in position to provide precision fire support from elevated position southeast of your location. Can you identify priority targets and provide guidance for engagement?" Rodriguez's response reflected both relief and skepticism. Overwatch, we have enemy positions at approximately 300 meters northeast, 250 meters northwest, and 400 meters due north of our position. Primary threats are automatic weapons positions that have us pinned down. But understand that these are long-distance shots under combat conditions. Are you certain you can engage effectively at these ranges? Maria studied the targets through her scope, calculating distances, wind compensation, and bullet drop for each position. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory from those long-ago hunting trips. The most important shot is always the first one. Take your time, control your breathing, and trust your training. Ranger 6, I have positive identification on multiple enemy positions. Beginning engagement now. Watch for my tracers and adjust your movement accordingly. Maria settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing, and placed her crosshairs on the first target. A Taliban fighter was positioned behind a rock outcropping approximately 1,150 meters away, firing bursts from an automatic weapon toward the Ranger's position. The shot would require precise calculation of wind drift and bullet drop across a distance that challenged even experienced snipers. She squeezed the trigger smoothly, exactly as her grandfather had taught her 20 years earlier in the Colorado mountains. The rifle fired, and through her scope she watched the bullet impact exactly where she had aimed. The enemy fighter dropped immediately, his weapon falling silent. Target down, Maria transmitted. Engaging second position. What happened next would be remembered by every ranger who survived that night as one of the most precise and effective displays of marksmanship they had ever witnessed. Over the next 12 minutes, Maria systematically engaged and eliminated 11 enemy positions with 11 shots, each one fired from distances exceeding 1,000 meters under combat conditions. Her shooting was methodical and devastatingly accurate. Each shot was carefully planned and precisely executed, taking into account environmental factors and target movement. The Taliban fighters had no idea where the fire was coming from, and their confusion allowed the Rangers to begin moving toward more defensible positions. But Maria's intervention was about to face its ultimate test. As she engaged the 11th target, she noticed through her scope that additional enemy forces were moving toward the Rangers' position from a direction that had previously been secure. The ambush was larger and more complex than anyone had realized, and the Rangers were about to face an even more dangerous situation. #assigned to logistics, not combat, until the Rangers were ambushed, and she dropped 11 exact shots. Maria's 11th shot eliminated the machine gun position that had been the primary threat to the Rangers' movement, but her scope revealed a problem that threatened to undo everything she had accomplished. A reinforcement group of at least 8 Taliban fighters was approaching the Rangers' position from the west, using a route that would allow them to attack from an unexpected direction. Ranger 6, you have additional enemy forces moving toward your position from the west. Maria transmitted urgently. Count approximately 8 personnel with automatic weapons. They'll be in effective range of your position within 5 minutes. Rodriguez's response was immediate and professional despite the stress of prolonged combat. Overwatch understood. We're moving to better defensive positions, but we're low on ammunition after sustained contact. Can you continue to provide fire support against the new threats? Maria studied the approaching enemy forces through her scope. They were moving tactically through terrain that offered good concealment, making individual targeting more difficult than the static positions she had been engaging. More challenging, they were aware that precision fire was being directed against their forces, and were using movement techniques designed to avoid sniper engagement. But Maria had advantages that the enemy forces didn't realize. Her logistics experience had given her detailed knowledge of every trail and terrain feature in the area. She could predict their movement routes and identify positions where they would be vulnerable to precision fire. Her grandfather's hunting lessons had taught her to think like her prey, anticipating their decisions and positioning herself accordingly. Ranger 6, I can provide continued fire support, but You need to be prepared to move immediately when I engage the reinforcement group. They're going to realize where the fire is coming from, and they may try to flank my position. Maria quickly calculated the geometry of the tactical situation. The approaching Taliban fighters would reach positions where they could effectively engage the Rangers within 4 to 5 minutes. She had enough ammunition for sustained precision shooting, but she would need to eliminate or suppress the entire group before they could establish effective firing positions. The first target presented itself as the lead Taliban fighter moved across a small clearing approximately 1,300 meters from Maria's position. The shot required maximum compensation for wind drift across the valley, and the target was moving at a steady pace that required precise timing. Maria controlled her breathing, led the target slightly to account for movement, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck exactly as intended, and the Taliban fighter dropped immediately. His companions reacted by seeking cover and changing their movement pattern, but Maria had anticipated this response. She had identified 3 additional positions where their alternate routes would expose them to precision fire. Over the next 8 minutes, Maria systematically engaged the reinforcement group as they attempted to reach assault positions. Her shooting was adapted to moving targets and changing tactical situations, requiring split-second decisions about target priority and engagement timing. She eliminated 6 of the 8 fighters and forced the remaining 2 to withdraw to positions where they could no longer threaten the Rangers. But Maria's position was now compromised. Muzzle flashes from her rifle had revealed her location to surviving enemy forces, and she could see through her scope that Taliban fighters were beginning to move in her direction. She had perhaps 10 minutes before her position would be overrun by forces seeking to eliminate the sniper who had devastated their ambush. Ranger 6, my position is compromised. Enemy forces are moving to engage my location. You need to move immediately toward the extraction point while their attention is focused on me. Rodriguez understood the tactical implications immediately. Overwatch, we can provide covering fire to assist your withdrawal. What is your extraction plan? Maria looked back toward her Humvee, where Sergeant Martinez was monitoring the situation and preparing for rapid movement. The route back to the vehicle would expose her to potential enemy fire, but staying in her current position would certainly result in being overrun by superior numbers. Ranger 6, I'm withdrawing to vehicle position and returning to base. Continue movement toward extraction point. Helicopters should be available for pickup within 30 minutes. As Maria prepared to move, she took one final look through her scope at the battlefield she was leaving behind. The Rangers were successfully moving toward defensible positions near the extraction point. Enemy forces that had survived her precision shooting were either withdrawing or focusing on their own security rather than continuing the ambush. Her intervention had fundamentally changed the tactical situation and given the Rangers the opportunity they needed to escape. The withdrawal to the Humvee required a careful balance between speed and caution. Maria moved quickly but deliberately, carrying her equipment while maintaining awareness of potential threats. Martinez had the vehicle ready for immediate departure, and they were moving toward the base within 3 minutes of Maria leaving her shooting position. During the drive back to forward operating base Chapman, Maria reflected on what had just occurred. She had engaged 17 enemy targets at distances ranging from 1,150 to 1,350 meters, achieving successful hits on 16 of 17 shots. More importantly, her intervention had saved the lives of 12 Rangers who had been trapped in an ambush that could have been catastrophic. But the full implications of her actions were still developing. Radio communications indicated that the Rangers had successfully reached the extraction point and were being picked up by helicopters. All personnel were accounted for with only minor injuries. The Taliban forces had withdrawn from the area, apparently unwilling to continue operations against coalition forces who had demonstrated such effective precision fire capability. Maria arrived back at the base as the helicopters carrying the Rangers were landing at the main helipad. She was still carrying the precision rifle and wearing the night vision equipment she had used during the engagement. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison and Captain Williams were waiting for her at the communications center, along with several senior officers who had been monitoring the situation. "Santos, what you accomplished tonight was extraordinary," Morrison said as Maria returned the specialized equipment to the armory. "Your actions saved the lives of 12 Rangers and prevented what could have been a significant tactical defeat. But I need you to understand that this was completely outside normal procedures. We're going to have to conduct a full investigation and review." Maria nodded, understanding that her decision to volunteer for combat operations would have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate mission. Her logistics career was likely over, but she had no regrets about the choices she had made. When soldiers' lives were at stake, procedural considerations became secondary to doing whatever was necessary to ensure their safety. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found Maria at the communications center an hour later, after he and his team had completed their post-mission debriefing. His expression was serious, but his eyes reflected gratitude that went beyond words. "Santos, I don't know what training you had or where you learned to shoot like that, but you saved our lives tonight," Rodriguez said quietly. "Every one of my Rangers owes you a debt that we'll never be able to repay." That was the most precise and effective fire support I've ever seen under combat conditions. Maria smiled, thinking about her grandfather and the hunting lessons that had seemed so distant from military service. "Rodriguez, I learned everything I needed to know about shooting when I was 12 years old, hunting deer with my grandfather in Colorado. He taught me that shooting isn't about hitting targets. It's about being able to perform when everything depends on it." The formal investigation that followed Maria's actions resulted in recommendations for commendation rather than disciplinary action. Her initiative and marksmanship had prevented a significant military defeat and saved the lives of an entire Ranger team. Within 6 months, she had been transferred to specialized sniper training and eventually assigned to an elite precision shooting unit. Maria's transformation from logistics specialist to combat marksman became a case study used in military leadership schools to illustrate the importance of recognizing and utilizing individual capabilities regardless of formal job classifications. Her actions demonstrated that exceptional performance often comes from individuals who are willing to exceed their assigned responsibilities when circumstances require it. But for Maria, the most important outcome was simpler. 12 Rangers had returned safely to their families because she had been willing to use every skill she possessed when their lives depended on it. Her grandfather's lessons about patience, precision, and performing under pressure had ultimately proved more valuable than any formal military training. Years later, when Maria was asked about that night in Afghanistan, she would always emphasize that her success came from preparation that began long before she ever enlisted in the military. Every hour spent practicing at the rifle range, every detail learned about terrain and logistics, and every lesson about precision and patience had contributed to her ability to perform when it mattered most. The 11 shots she fired that night represented not just exceptional marksmanship, but the culmination of a lifetime of preparation for a moment when everything depended on doing the impossible.